Okay.
So good morning and welcome to the August presentation for the Montana Accessibility Interest Group. Today Ryan Hazen from Carroll College in Montana is joining us. He is a pedagogist working on creating innovative learning environments and then specializing in the redesign of curriculum and teaching practices that align with those new multi-display classrooms that they're really piloting and promoting at Carroll College. So Ryan works with both online and face-to-face environments. I've heard him do many presentations regionally and nationally. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation this morning, Ryan. And Ryan, just to clarify, if there are questions, we can just put those in the chat right while you're speaking. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Okay, well, welcome, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be presenting to the Accessibility Interest Group. I know that we're all working toward a world where every learning object, all of our learning materials are equally accessible to everyone in the classroom. And in my particular area at Carroll College, we have sort of a special problem when it comes to presenting accessible material in the classroom as well as online. Well, we all know that we have challenges when we're presenting material online. A lot of us use Moodle. We self-host Moodle here at Carroll. And it's not just about using the right learning management system, but also training your faculty to use the right header tags and to make sure they're not using colors to share meaning, and making sure that they describe their links and all of these things that we talk about all the time. But what I do most of the time, in addition to administer our Moodle, is I work in classrooms that look like this. And what you're looking at is called the Carroll College Sandbox Classroom. It's basically a room that has whiteboard paint all the way around, and it has multiple displays in the classroom that students have access to use. Now, for the sighted user, this is a great thing because we can pretty quickly share content. We can annotate over top of it by writing over top of it. We can share things from our own computers, or we can get to the internet to share things visually on the walls. But in terms of accessibility, this can kind of be a nightmare if you don't have some strategies that you can use to deal with this. So, for example, I'll show you just sort of a use case here with this classroom. Here on the screen right now, you see a student who has pulled up a diagram along with some physics homework that he's doing, and he's using whiteboard markers to write over the projection screen. Well, he's writing on whiteboard paint, and the projection is on the whiteboard paint. But for the sighted user, when you walk into a room like this, at first blush, this seems like a very convenient, easy thing to use. But when you start thinking about accessibility, it presents some problems that are, I think, fairly obvious. There's no way for us to share this visual content with a non-sighted user without translating it into something that they can hear or something that they can feel. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But when we think about using a room like this in terms of accessibility concerns, you can kind of break it down into what different people in the classroom need to do. And I'm going to start talking about teachers specifically. What is it that a teacher in a modern multi-display classroom needs to do to make that learning accessible for a student? First of all, it's a wonderful opportunity for teachers to reconsider the purpose of the visuals that they're using in their classroom. So often I see faculty that use pictures or images not necessarily for any particular learning purpose, but because maybe it looks good on the PowerPoint, or because they think it's a nice thing to have on the wall. Well, when we think about accessibility, especially in a multi-display classroom, it behooves the faculty to take a really close, hard look at how important those visuals actually are. Because we have to remember that in making a classroom like this accessible, the faculty has to take the time to explain what it is that they're presenting visually. And this can be a really good thing for the teacher because it allows us to really pare down the visuals that we're using to only those things that are the most important, that are worth the time for them to explain to someone who couldn't see it. A good exercise to do this is to ask your faculty, hey, if you were a non-sighted user, what sort of content are you supposed to be getting out of this visual? And can you, as the faculty, explain that using words instead of visuals? So it's a good opportunity to really think about why you're sharing the content that you're sharing and how you can communicate the meaning of that visual content without actually sharing the visual itself. Now, for students, this is a pretty darn powerful process. I'm going to share, this is kind of the unexpected benefit of thinking about accessibility, is that it forces us to translate meaning and content between different modalities. So I'm going to share with you right now on the screen, you're seeing by the way, for the teacher, right now on the screen is a really important phrase because it reminds us to describe what is on the screen, but not only what's on the screen, but what that visual means. So right now on the screen, you're seeing a whiteboard drawing that was done in an alpha freshman seminar class that I teach at Carroll College. And it contains, at the very top, the Carroll College athletics logo, which is a C with a halo around it. It's very recognizable to students here. And then just below that, as though it is supporting it, is a Chi-Rho symbol, which is a P and an X. It's a Catholic symbol for Christ. Carroll is a Catholic college. So the students are trying to communicate here that that we have a college that is its own thing, but is sort of in this diocesan context. And then in front of that PX, that Chi-Rho symbol, we see the Buddhist karma wheel, we see a Star of David, the crescent and star of Islam, there's a cross, and there's also an Om symbol. So these are symbols from various different religions around the world, but the Chi-Rho is much bigger than these other religious symbols, even though it is in the background. And just to the right of that, we have a quote from the Carroll College mission statement. And it reads, "Welcome all persons of goodwill in a cooperative journey towards truth and virtue." So the gist of this assignment was at the very beginning of this freshman seminar class, and the students had to take paragraphs from the Carroll College mission statement and translate those into images that they drew on the walls. So the power of this process for the students, this is a synthesis and analysis activity that gets students reading a paragraph and doing some really higher order thinking with that content of how do we translate it into an image. Well, anytime you can take a student and ask them to translate a graph, an image, or a set of symbols into words, you're offering them a very powerful opportunity to learn that content. It's that switching between modality that really cements for students learning with a piece of content. So when you think about how to take visual content and share it with non-sighted users, you're actually benefiting your students a whole lot if you can leverage the students themselves to try and translate that content for non-sighted users in the room. So when we're thinking about not only what is best for the non-sighted user, but what is best for the sighted user as well in this classroom, this translation between different modalities is a very powerful learning tool in and of itself, independent of its necessity in the classroom in terms of accessibility. So those are some of the things that come to mind when we think about teaching in classrooms like this. We want to not only give our non-sighted students the opportunity to engage with the content that we might engage with visually on our own terms. But we also want to give those sighted students the opportunity to translate that visual content into something that our non-sighted users can access. So these considerations push us into very powerful learning activities when it comes right down to it. Another consideration that we want to think about is how can we present content not just visually, but in the tactile area. And I'm going to give just a let me find my picture here really quickly. At Carroll, we just purchased a Lulzbot 3D printer. Now let me find a picture of this thing, and I'll stick it up here for you. And the great thing about a 3D printer is that it gives us the ability to actually produce physical objects that represent what we might otherwise talk about visually. So here, let me go ahead and grab, get this picture up here real quick. And so here is a picture of the machine that we're using right now. And what it is it basically takes filament, a polymer, a plastic filament, and it melts it in little bits, and it layers on different layers to create 3D objects based on schematics that we can create in a computer, or we can download for free online. And at first, the 3D printer seems like an extravagance in some cases, but in terms of making an actual classroom accessible with visual content in particular, you can use a 3D printer to print out graphs. For example, if you're explaining a bell curve, usually our faculty are used to putting it on the wall, and you look up there and you say, hey, that's what a bell curve looks like. But a non-sighted user can't see that. You can take the time to describe it, and that's very helpful, like I said earlier, for the students as well as for the sighted students as well as the non-sighted students. But you can also take the time to print out that bell curve in a 3D fashion and make a printed plastic version of it that you can then hand to a user that they can feel and have a tactile sensation of how a bell curve looks. And you can say, well, on the outsides it's skinnier because fewer people are at the very low end and at the very high end. But as you move toward the middle, you see that bell curve get bigger, and you can feel it, and you can put indicators on there for what percentile lands where. And this gives the student an opportunity not only to experience the bell curve in a really meaningful way, in a similar way to the way that we would experience it visually as sighted users, but also it gives your students the opportunity to take the time to think about how they might share a concept with something that they can touch rather than something that they can just see. So in terms of, we tend to think of accessibility as something that you have to add to a course, or you have to add to Moodle, but when we really think about it, its long-term implications, it's good not only for non-sighted users or users with hearing disabilities, but it's also good for the students who do not have those disabilities, because it gives us the opportunity to translate the content that we're talking about into multiple different modalities. And we know that when you light up all those parts of your brain, that's what creates long-term learning in a student. So I want to give you one more example of this, and again, this is going to be from my freshman seminar class, and it's going to be another visual, but This is mostly to demonstrate uh, the power that translating words into images or images into words, that sharing process can be. So on the screen right now, you see another paragraph from our mission statement. Instilling and enduring wonder for knowledge that will prepare students for leadership in their chosen vocations. Now, the visual that students came up with for this has many things: a career path, it's got a little doctor symbol, it's got some test tubes and things, it's got a person in a suit with a briefcase, but most importantly, it has a picture of SpongeBob SquarePants, who is a animated character, an animated sponge that wears shorts and a tie. And he's got this just look of wonder and joy on his face, and he's holding in his hands over his head a rainbow. And this is kind of a silly representation of what the students in this instance interpreted as wonder for knowledge. SpongeBob has this look of sort of just unbridled joy and happiness and wonder with this rainbow that he's holding up over his head. And this idea, this image, became shorthand for what is a fairly complex idea, sacramental imagination, in the Catholic intellectual tradition. And sacramental imagination is your ability, especially in this case, to look at something and behold it, or experience something and feel it as having more meaning than just its immediate meaning. One might be sitting next to a river and feel an overwhelming sense of connection with nature. You'll hear the sounds of the river, you'll feel maybe the moss and the rocks below you, and you'll think to yourself, you know, this is a really special thing. Whether or not that's linked to one religion or another is immaterial, but the experience of that is what we would refer to as sacramental imagination. Now, this may seem off topic, but when we get to talking about sacramental imagination later on in this semester with this course, students started to use this image of SpongeBob as shorthand for sacramental imagination. They'd say, oh, this author in this poem or in this section of her book or her work or whatever she's being a little like SpongeBob here. You know, she's feeling like this sense of wonder, she's feeling the sense of connection, she's feeling the sense of satisfaction and fullness that for them became represented by this idea of SpongeBob SquarePants holding a rainbow and looking kind of silly in the way that he is experiencing what we would call sacramental imagination in the academic space. So that process of translating from images to words to sounds to tactile objects is necessary for making a classroom like the ones that we build here at Carroll. I'm going to share our most recent classroom. On the screen now, there is a whiteboard wall with 3 projection screens on it, and this is only half of the room that we're currently building. We're going to put another 3 projection screens on the other side, 2 TVs on the back of the room, and another projection in the front for a grand total of 9 projections in the room. So when we talk about visual content, we know that we're going to continue to have visual content. We're going to continue to integrate audiovisual materials into the classroom, but instead of thinking of it as a barrier for a student in terms of accessibility, we need to think about it as an opportunity to get our students translating that content from one modality to another. And that is the most powerful learning experience that I can think of, and cognitive scientists in general would agree that translation of modalities is really important for long-term understanding of the content. So as these screens are not going to go away, we need to understand it not as an impediment to learning or an accessibility problem rather, but an opportunity for us to change the way that we think about how students interact with our content. So that is most of what I had to talk about. I'd be happy to take any questions or foster any more discussion at this point, because I know we spend a lot of time talking about accessibility on the web, but accessibility in person in the actual classroom where we're teaching and learning on a regular basis is something that we don't have a lot of dialogue about. And it's so I'd love to hear any questions or comments about some of the ideas that I've shared with you today in terms of accessibility and especially in modern multi-display classrooms.
So I'll jump in, Ryan, because that was really an interesting set of examples and perspectives that you just shared. And what really stood out to me is that it's so related to universal design for learning. You know, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression. But oftentimes in the literature around UDL, when we talk about multiple means of representation, we're looking at what teachers can do to represent their content in multiple ways. And I think what you're really talking about is that this pertains to students also really translating and getting involved in that translation process, which is very, very powerful. So I really appreciate that perspective.
And I probably should have shared my biases to begin with. I spend a lot of time talking about active engagement by students. So when I'm helping faculty design their curriculum and design learning experiences in the classroom, I tend to try and get the faculty not to do very much in the actual classroom and sort of pass that off to the students, because it's that engagement that really helps us learn. So it helps to remember that there's the students themselves should be working together on this as well. For the teacher, it's the rules are pretty simple. Describe what you have on the screen. Well, first of all, limit what you're going to put on the screen to things that are absolutely necessary. And then when you do put something on the screen, explain it, and not only how it looks, but also how its looks pertain to what you're talking about with the content. And then finally, provide tactile examples whenever possible. Use it whether you're using a 3D printer or ready-made molecular sets. You know, for example, when we're talking about the sciences, you know, when we're learning chemistry, or we're talking about how substances interact with one another. We really want those tactile building blocks so we can put them together, take them apart, feel what they look like, because that's beneficial mutually for the sighted and non-sighted user. So those are the very basic things for the teachers. But really, I think the most important thing for the teachers is to get the students themselves involved in that translation back and forth, because that's going to benefit everyone, and it's going to create a learning community that's helpful and it's robust for everybody that's there. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. I do tend to focus on students. That's my bias.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a question for you then. As you're designing these new classrooms and these new learning environments, do students kind of spur on your thinking about the design of those classrooms, and then are they engaged in helping with that design so that it's inclusive?
Absolutely. We have, in the inclusive design, I'll go ahead and share this picture again really quickly. The students are very much involved in giving us feedback and helping us design these classrooms. Just based on the fact that we go into the classrooms during class sessions, I'll help faculty deploy new learning and teaching techniques. And I'll be in there actually working with the students. So a lot of what we do is based on the feedback that we get from the students actually in the live flow of the classroom. And then in this picture that I'm sharing right now, there's a young man standing next to the display on the farthest right, and he's doing some calibration with the touch interface on that display. that student is actually helping us build this classroom. He hung those projectors and is involved in helping us to put that together. And we have multiple other students that help us with these things. So we certainly have students involved both in the design and installation process. The universal design in the classroom is something that I think we could do better at Carroll, certainly. But I tend to focus on the pedagogy of teaching to everyone simultaneously, because that is our imperative as educators.
Great, thanks for that explanation, because I think as you innovate more and more there and explore newer designs, I'm always watching what you're doing, because I think you'll be designing even different classrooms, and I'm sure you'll be coming up with other ways to work with curriculum as you design these learning spaces. So it will be exciting to see where this takes you, especially as technology evolves too, and there can be different uses of technology within those rooms.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too. We try to build classrooms that are 10 years in the future, so we're trying to find out what's around the next bend right now. We think the sandbox is a good model, but we don't think it's going to last forever. So we'll see. Especially as we think about universality of design of the classroom, I think we're going to have we're going to be moving into a different paradigm within the next 5 years. We're just waiting for that next piece of that next game-changing piece of technology to come out, so we can reframe what we're doing, in our own minds.
So I don't know if Kathy or Brenda have questions, but I'll continue because I'm very excited about this topic. So as you're using Moodle or whatever learning management system, and if you're immersed in a fully online environment, how do you translate these kinds of practices into that online environment?
That's a great question. First of all, I know Marlene, you and Aaron do a really good job of listing out those sort of high points of web accessibility standards. First of all, I have my faculty do HTML pages with header tags for their syllabi, and descriptive links in there to all the things that they're referencing. But in terms of how to get students in the online environment to do this multimodal translation of content, a few suggestions. First of all, discussion forums where students not only have to you have to respond to maybe an image that you share, or get an image that is a graph or a representation of some of the content, but also have a really in-depth explanation of that image, not just in the alt tag, but also as the central point of the assignment. How can you verbalize the importance of the content that we're looking at or not looking at, and make that accessible to everyone? That assignment in and of itself for a student is a very powerful learning opportunity. Also, taking a shift away from thinking of video as the end all be all of media creation, and giving yourself the opportunity to work in other mediums that don't rely so heavily on the visual aspect. So whether that's creating interactive models of content that can be accessed by screen readers, or creating collaborative activities that are entirely text-based. We're talking about wikis or glossaries, especially in Moodle. These sort of collaborative information building tools really give us the opportunity to create content that that can be read by screen readers, but that can also be that same sort of collaborative translation activity that students really benefit from, both in the classroom and online. So it's in terms of a fully online class, yeah, you just have to make sure that, if you're using video, you have to have judicious expectations of how that video is going to be used, to how it's going to strike your users, both sided and non-sided. And you have to remember that visuals don't stand alone. They can't stand alone. You have to do some translation yourself as the faculty member or the teacher, but you also have to get students involved in that translation process so that they can benefit from that multimodal interaction with content that we've been talking about here. So when I think about online pedagogy and in-person pedagogy, the rules are always the same. You want your students doing higher order cognitive tasks with that content. And this is an avenue to that both increases accessibility and increases the rigor of what our students are doing in both of those spaces. So those are a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, I think with online, that online course can become so text heavy and so full of print material, and it's so hard for those students with print disabilities, not just the screen reader users, but the students who just have dyslexia. They just don't deal with all of that text. And so I think what you're talking about, this idea of translation and using multimedia, not just staying within one mode, is really, really valuable for lots of students, and especially those students with print disabilities, or those students with hidden disabilities who don't identify themselves and have obvious reasons for not identifying themselves.
I'll tell you one of the tools that I've seen that I'm kind of enamored with in this area is there's a company called Flipgrid that has a Moodle integration that does basically short snippets of audio, video within a forum, so that as students, you can go in there and pose a question as the teacher, and you can say it out loud so that so that you can hear it, and you can do subtitles with that too. And then the students come and respond in kind in the same way. And when we combine both the visual of the person they're talking, the subtitles of what they're saying, and the audio of what they're saying as well, this makes a really more interactive and more accessible forum for exchanging ideas than simply text-based or simply any one of those other modalities. So we want to privilege those types of activities that hit as many different senses as possible. And that is, like I said earlier, that's good for everyone. That's not just good for students with disabilities.
Yes, I really appreciate those perspectives. And I really like the idea of seeing accessibility as an opportunity. And we find that over and over with departments here on our campus. When they have to really think about accessibility, they find that it's an opportunity to improve their program or their school. So it's a really, really powerful way to approach it, rather than just thinking about a checklist with barriers that you've got to remove. So,
or trying to go back and retrofit learning activities that weren't designed to be accessible to begin with. I mean, really, when we talk about accessibility and we talk about great universal design, we need to start over from the ground up. It's not a matter of retrofitting something we've already done. It's a matter of reimagining how we might present this content. And I really like to give faculty the opportunity to do that. It can be a very fruitful experiment for them.
Right. I'm wondering if anyone else has comments or questions. Feel free to use your mic or the chat. While we're just waiting to see if they have any questions or comments. Brenda, no questions. Kathy, no questions. Thanks, both of you, for letting us know. I've been working with the accessibility of maps and trying to grapple with that problem. And I've just come across a book of tactile maps where they have different yeah, thanks, Kathy. Good luck. They in the legend, say they would do different symbols, and those would have different textures, like maybe farmland would be slanted lines, and maybe urban areas would be dots, and so they've got their legend all set up tactily, and then all that information is in the accompanying map with very careful borders around the edges, not really profound borders, they don't jump out at you, but the borders are there. And I thought that was really an interesting example of a simple way to make a map accessible in a face-to-face environment.
Absolutely. And I think that as 3D printers become more available and more common, we're going to see faculty and departments, schools at first, then departments, then individual faculty, as they sort of saturate the market with the ability to create their own tactile maps. So I'm really excited about that as an accessibility tool. In addition to it just being a neat thing that we get to play with, but I really like the idea of a 3D printer as your primary accessibility tool to create tactile models that fit your content individually instead of just generally. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. I think that's a big game changer for in-person classes in terms of accessibility.
Right, and I think places like the Diagram Center, and we've had people speak from the Diagram Center to the Montana Accessibility Interest Group. They see too that those 3D printers are a really big key right now, and they're looking at places like that. These nonprofits are looking at creating repositories of content and files that people can just grab and use with their own 3D printers. So I think it's really important to watch for those repositories that are being built.
Yeah, the one that we use most of all to get designs is called Thingiverse, and there's already some good stuff on there that can be used for these purposes. But as we create, I think what's important is that as we individually and as a group create more of these, that we find that platform where we can share those designs with other people, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel or reinvent the tactile map, as it were, every time that we need to use it. So. All right, Kathy, did you raise your hand?
I did raise my hand. I missed seeing you guys at the Mood. I couldn't go. My friend had broken her ankle, and I had to help her out. But anyway, how do we get involved with, or how do you suggest you can get involved with your campus when they're making new classrooms to have some input? We usually have some input on our high-tech classrooms that we build, but the normal classrooms, they build these new buildings, and the one they built in the NRB, they're awful. They put all of the screens over the whiteboards. The podiums are off to the side. They're awful to teach in. I don't know who designs them. Is there a suggestion that an accessibility committee or someone could get involved with their design of the new classrooms?
I think that would be a really reasonable thing on any campus. Carroll's a little special because we're small, and I don't know how this actually happened in the organizational structure that Dan Case wound up in charge of all the classrooms, but somehow it wound up that the academic technology, he's the associate director of academic technology, I think is the right term. But I would recommend to any campus when they're doing remodels and they're doing new classroom builds that they have their academic technology people do the design, and better yet, the installation. I know that's not always feasible, especially with the really super high tech classrooms where maybe you're contracting people to come in and build in the video conferencing equipment, especially if you're using something like Cisco. But the primary design for the classroom really ought to come from the academic technology people, and those academic technology people need to know accessibility standards, and they need to know how their faculty teach. They have to be in the classrooms on a regular basis, even if it's just walking through the halls and popping in, looking around, having informal conversations with faculty. You just can't make a new classroom unless you know how it's going to be used. So I would bring that up as a concern to the all the organizational structures are all different, but here we have a vice president of the physical environment, the campus builds, and so we make sure that he keeps us abreast of where the money is coming from and where it's going, and that they are not building classrooms until we get a chance to design them. So that's tricky, and it's a different solution for every campus. But I would go as far up as I possibly could to say we really need to have our academic technologists have input on classroom design.
Yeah, we have an access committee, but they only meet like maybe once a semester, and they went through and did a lot of the physical stuff on campus, but I'll have to start poking around and see whose bug or who ears they need to put the bug in for trying to be part of the newer classrooms that they build, to have some input on better design for teaching and that kind of thing, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and keep an eye on. I don't know. Try and keep an eye on those. If all else fails and you can't really get access or whatever, try and keep an eye on the meeting minutes where people talk about these things. I know that Dan regularly keeps an eye on what people are talking about in meetings, and when things come up that there might be a new classroom remodel, he's first on it. Another strategy is to actually suggest the classroom rebuilds yourself. Go up to them and say, with the plan, because we usually don't have the money before we design these classrooms. We go into a room, we look around, and we say, okay, let's make a design for this room. And then we take that design and we take it to the Office of Institutional Advancement, or whoever that would be on campus for different institutions, alumni relations or whatever. And we say, when the next funding opportunity comes up, this is what we'd like to do with it. And so that's another avenue, is to actually have the design in place first and then take it to the people that are going to fund that physical classroom. So that you're kind of out front of the game instead of trying to play catch up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, we found out, I'm a big fan of the smart podiums, and we have quite a few rooms with them, but they're not making the podiums anymore. You're supposed to buy a regular touchscreen monitor and then buy their software. So, so we're adjusting that, but most of my faculty that I work with love the smart podiums once they start using them. So we have had some input with that, but it's just getting people to think differently.
Yeah, find your worst classroom. Find your worst classroom, redesign it, and then take it up to the people that will fund it. And I bet you.
Oh, good! I had the perfect one in mind. Yeah. It's awful.
We do that too.
I don't know how students even put up being in that classroom, because it's just awful.
Well, the picture that I showed earlier of the 3 blue screens, that classroom that's still in renovation right now, exactly how we started that rebuild. Dan said this is the worst classroom on campus. It has no windows. It's tiered. The
Yeah,
seats aren't good. The
yeah.
walls are in bad shape. So I said, well, why don't we just redesign it and then fund it and build it? And that's what wound up happening. But we came with the design first. We didn't have the funding. We were leading, not chasing. So that's
No, in that picture, I'm sorry I missed the first part of your presentation. I was in another meeting and I came back. I'd locked myself out of the office. But in that picture, did it look like there were steps?
That's right. So this room was tiered to begin with, and that was one of the big problems that we had with the room to begin with. We couldn't erase the tiers. We wanted to flatten it all out, but we were
So
told
do
in
you,
no uncertain terms that we couldn't do that.
so do you have to put a ramp in there? Or do
You
people with
know,
wheelchairs have to
that,
be in the front?
that is what we're doing,
Okay.
and we're going to have railings along the fronts of these tiers. So this classroom is tremendously problematic to begin with. But when we redesign it, we should have a much more accessible space at the end, as well as a much more engaging space for the students.
Well, we
So
have
yeah,
found that tiered rooms work well for conferencing because and we left the computers. The other rooms that we have computers in them, and we found the faculty really didn't like that there. And when you're video conferencing, the people are behind the monitors. So you've been in our ELC 202, and leaving the computers out of there was really nice. Faculty love that room. They can bring their laptops in and plug them in if they want, but the tiers really add a nice feature when you're conferencing, to be able to see the professor, the presenter or whomever. But yeah, I guess the wheelchair people would just have to sit in front, but
yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, we had, one of the challenges with this room was one of the questions we asked ourselves is, can we scale up the sandbox, which is a 24-person room officially? We fit many more than that in there, but you've probably seen that at a couple of our conferences. But one of our challenges was, how can we scale this up to like a 44, 50-person room? And so this is our first foray into that. And I have a hunch that those tiers are going to be really helpful in terms of the students that would be in the sort of the traditional back of the room, seeing what's going on up at the front and being able to display their own content to other students in the room, just because of the elevation factor. But yeah, that's just a hunch. We'll see how that shakes out when we actually teach in that room.
So are you planning to put, what are you planning to put in those tiers? Are you planning to put, I know I'm very familiar with your sandbox classroom over there where they can move the furniture and build their own classroom, so to speak. So what are you guys doing with that tiered room?
So we are going to use the same Han furniture that we have in the classroom, the sandbox that you've been in, actually, just flexible tables on wheels. And that's why the railing and the lips on those tiers are really important. Those aren't installed yet, so I don't have a picture of that. But yeah, we don't want students rolling off the side of our tiers.
Why not?
The few
They
considerations.
keep them awake.
Whoa, wake up.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll be anxious to see it. I'll have to see it when it's done
Yeah, we
next year
don't
at
we
the
don't know how
MOOC.
it's going to shake out yet with that many students in a sandbox, but yeah, we're pretty optimistic, and we have faculty that are optimistic about it too, so that helps a lot.
Yeah, I like your idea of finding the worst classroom. We'll have to go for that. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, it's a good place to start, because if you've got a really terrible classroom and you've got a good redesign for it, you're a lot more likely to get it funded than if you start with a pretty good classroom and redesign it. Yeah, start with something that's just falling apart and horrible, and you've got
Yeah,
a lot.
we have some of those.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
Ryan, yeah, thanks, Kathy. Ryan, the cost of these redesigns, for instance, the cost of building the sandbox classroom, could you just talk about that for a minute in terms of expense?
Sure. Far and away, the most expensive component of these sandbox classrooms is the furniture, the Han tables and chairs. And for a 25 seat, I don't know all the numbers for this new one that we're building, but for the sandbox for the 25, 30 person capacity room, we're talking $20,000 to $30,000 just for the furniture. But everything else, including the whiteboard paint, the projection systems, and the Extron switches, comes in at about under 12,000. So, and those projector prices, especially those Epson Brightlinks that we use, keep going down. And the bulbs themselves, I think, are maybe $40. I don't know. You'd have to talk to Dan for all the specifics about that. He's got all the lists of the prices and things. But compared to a teal classroom where you run a lot of wires and do floor boxes and things like that, I mean, you're talking $150,000, $200,000 a room for something like that. And the sandbox model allows multi-display, interactive collaboration. Those Epson projectors come with a wireless display connection that students can install on their own laptops and just send their content up there to the screen. So we have the functionality of those really expensive classrooms with switchers and closets full of, the digital matrix switchers, amplifiers, speakers, and things like that. You have the functionality of those rooms, but you don't have that closet full of Extron boxes or Crestron or AMX or whoever you use. So we save a lot of money on cabling and on especially digital matrix switchers. They're very, very expensive. So it's the most cost-effective way to build a modern classroom that I've encountered yet. And I'm very, if we're over $50,000 for this 44 seat sandbox that we were just talking about, I'm going to be surprised. I'm pretty sure that we're under 50,000, which is an awfully good deal for a multi-display classroom that can accommodate that many people.
Yeah, so that's a really good argument too, Kathy, that you can keep in your back pocket, just the cost effectiveness of this kind of redesign. So,
and your return on investment is huge. I mean, the $35,000 or whatever we spent on the sandbox 5 years ago at this point has already, it's had a palpable impact on teaching on campus, and it's also given us a showcase classroom for when people come through for tours. We have special events. It's really nice and flexible. So, yeah, the return on investment for what we spent on that has just been astronomical. You can't even quantify the benefits we've had from having that classroom there.
Yeah,
Great.
our classrooms have run way expensive because we put all that stuff in there. So it would be better, maybe we can come up with a nice plan with a lot cheaper. That's a good thing to think about. That's given me a lot of ideas. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, and we also save money on labor because we will either have we're confident enough and we know enough to actually do the installation. So that saves us a lot of money too. If you're going to hire contractors to do the installation, that'll add to the cost. But we've managed to just sort of the very cavalier attitude charge in there and do it ourselves. So.
Well, you've done a great job.
Thank you.
You should hire out to the rest of our campuses.
Hey, contact me on my Gmail address. There we go.
So Kathy, I'll send the recording out as soon as I have it, and I'll create a page for Ryan on the Montana Accessibility Interest Group. But as you watch the part that you missed,
Yeah.
You may have be able to use this video even as some
Yeah,
as a communication tool. So just so you
sure.
know.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
So Brenda, thanks for your comments. Before we let you go, Ryan, I just wanted to make sure we had the proper URLs. I've got Thingiverse in the chat. Am I in the correct place for that?
Yeah, yep, that's it.
Okay, and then I have Flipgrid, which is for multimedia forums.
That's right. And they have a Moodle plugin, so keep that in mind.
Okay, great. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting and helpful. I think it's been a really good discussion too. So thank you once
Great. Well, thanks
again.
for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
All right, well, we'll be in touch. Thank you,
All
everyone.
right.
Have a wonderful Friday.
All right. You too. Bye, everybody.